Ready? Okay. You're ready to go. All right, several things. I set up Power accounts for this entire class. So for those of you who want to, start to kind of play around with a MySQL database and experiment how to get to a MySQL database, now you can do that on a Power server. So I'll show you guys how to log into the Power server, and then we'll go from there. All right. So to sign into the Power server, you can use SSH. And your web pages are visible to the internet, okay? But you don't have to, make your pages visible. It's just that, the index of the class is visible from the internet. So I'll show you how to get there first. Yep, go ahead.
That terminal window you just had up, was that Windows?
No, this is using Linux, so I'm just using a. Yeah, so in Windows, if you want to use SSH, you want to use a Putty, P-U-T-T-Y, which is also on the Power server. So the first thing I want to do is to show you the URL of the Power server itself. This is the home page of the Power server. So if you type power.arc.losreals.edu, this is the home page. The home page has several things that you might be interested in. The first thing is Putty, which is that link here. P-U-T-T-Y stands for, I think it's what university? What is the P? Is it Pennsylvania? Pittsburgh? But anyway, it's one of the universities, okay? One of the universities that starts with a P, and TTY stands for teletype. So it's really a terminal program so that you can log in remotely to a server to do stuff, okay? But it does use SSH, which is secure shell, and it's a very secure protocol. So you might want to download this executable. It's just an executable. If you look at the URL here, it is just an executable. Right-click on it, save it to a local machine or your thumb drive, double-click on the executable, and it doesn't install, it just runs, okay? So it's kind of cool that way. It will allow you to hook up to, to basically connect to a remote server to do administrative work, set up your database and all the other stuff that you might need to do. You can even create web pages and scripts, directly from Putty if you know how to use VI or Nano or one of the editors that runs on the server side. Okay. If you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. It is not a requirement for this class, but I noticed enough people in this class, want to connect to a remote database. So this is what you need to know in order to do that using the Power server. If you look at the classes here, we should be listed here somewhere, cisp362. All right, so there we go. These are people of this class, Programming for Mobile Devices 1. So the first thing you want to do is to hover over your name. I'm going to pick someone who is not here. Let's see. Try to find that name.
Just use me the first one.
Okay, all right, if you don't mind. Okay, so if you just hover your mouse pointer over a particular name, you can see the URL down at the lower left corner of your screen, depending on which browser, but I think most browsers will show the URL at the lower left corner. So in this case, you can see the username is BURNST. I know it's kind of small for you guys, but you know where to find it, okay? So that would be, the name after the tilde, the little squiggly line symbol is your login name. Okay, so that's how you find your own login name. Because for certain types of names, we have multiple people with the same last name and the same first initial. Then you have a 1 or 2 or 3, a number after that. So that's how you find your login name. I'll just pick another person here, as an example. Sorry?
You can go line.
And yours is?
Third row, almost to the bottom.
Third row.
Almost to the bottom.
Oh, okay. So you have, so you don't have any collision, no other student at this point has the same, last name and the first initial. So yours is just your last name with your first initial, all lowercase. Okay. So regardless, you just find your name, on the website first, hover over it, and then you can find your actual username this way. Okay. So once you find your username, you will have to, you're going to log in. The way you log in, I'm going to use Putty here. I have Putty installed in Linux too. So we'll go to Internet Putty. The Windows version of Putty looks exactly the same. Okay, so for those of you who have used Putty already, you will know that, hey, it looks exactly the same because Putty is Putty. In Linux, I did not really have to use Putty, but I want to use Putty to show you how to use Putty to connect to the power server. Okay, so for the host name, it is the full name of power.arc.losreals.edu. If you just use power when you're on campus, it will work. Okay, but if you're off campus, you have to give it the entire name. Or you can, if you remember the IP address, it is 169.196.78.8. Okay, don't ask me why I remember that because I've typed it in so many times. So, but it's easier to just type in power.arc.losreals.edu. You can kind of mess around with all the other stuff too, but if you are not going to mess around with the other things, you can just click open, and it will open up a box here, and it will give you a security warning. And basically it says, oh, you have never connected to this server before, and the fingerprint is blah 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 blah. 6. Right here it says it's 6035 blah 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 blah. Do you want to connect? Are you sure this is the server that you want to connect to? And we'll just say yes, accept. And you can see that the prompt is now open here. I can change the font size. Let me see if I can. Nope, that just changes the size of the window. To change the font size, I have to right click. Doesn't seem to have an option to let me do that. Yep.
Is that work backed up on the power server?
Say again?
When we put our work up on the power server, is it backed up and save an archive too?
At this point, I have not set up my little backup server yet, so it's not quote unquote not backed up at this point. So if you want to, you can use WinSCP to copy everything back to your side. You can do a MySQL dump and dump out the entire database, and just back up everything that way. But the backup utility will be set up as soon as I install my extranet on my office computer and have that script up and running again. Good point. Okay, so when you log in, what you want to do is to log in as your username that you look up, on the server, on the browser itself. So let's just say that this is my username, because that really is my username. And then it will ask you for the password. Your initial password is not very secure. It is your student ID. Your 7-digit student ID without the W is your initial password. Okay, so you should be able to log in now, using your 7-digit student ID. Mine is a little bit different because I set it up a long time ago, so I have my own password already. Is that working using your 7-digit student ID? Okay. So for those of you who could log in and plan to use your account like this, the first thing you want to do is to run passwd, which is the password command. So you run passwd, press enter. It will ask you to reset your password. It will first ask you about your current password, which is your 7-digit student ID. Then you have to re-enter a new password twice. The new password has requirements. I think it needs like 8 characters, uppercase, lowercase, digits, and symbols. And there's very few restrictions as far as what you can use as a part of your password. I would probably make it the same as your district password, so this way you don't have to remember another password. But this password database is not connected to the district Active Directory, so when you change the other password, it doesn't affect the power server. Okay. Are there any questions at this point? No questions? Okay. So each one of you will have, each one of you has your own database already. In other words, when I set up these accounts, I also set up databases for each account in this class. The database name is the same as your login name. So if you know your login name, you already know your database name, and the password to your database is also the same. Okay. And for those of you who know how to use MySQL, you say MySQL. Let me see if I can. Okay, I'm gonna switch gear here. Instead of using Putty, I'm gonna use my regular screen because the font is just a lot bigger this way. So I'm gonna sign in here. Okay, this is a lot better because it's just the font is just much bigger, like this one. Okay, so if you want to directly talk to MySQL to set up your tables and to populate the tables and whatnot, you run MySQL, which is the name of the client program, you specify -p to specify the password. You can also use your name here, because that's your database name. It will do a connection to that particular database. I would not put -p and then your actual password. Just put -p and then press the enter key. It will prompt you for your password. Okay. So in this case, I did not set up my own system, so it's gonna say denied. Yep.
What did you say password again? Like default password?
Your default password is your 7-digit student ID. When you reset your account password, it does not reset your MySQL password. So your MySQL password is still your 7-digit student ID.
Yeah, my login, I put in my student number, but my password is the same thing.
No, your login is your last name with the first initial. You have to go to the Power Server first and just kind of check out your actual account name. Okay, but since I know the system, now you guys don't want to do this because you're not root and you won't know the password either. But I just want to show you what it should look like once you make a connection. So once you make a connection successfully, this is what you should see. This is not a MySQL class. I'm not going to talk too much about how to use MySQL. For those of you who want to learn how to do it, go to the website for MySQL. It has a pretty good tutorial on how to do various things with a MySQL server. For those of you who have taken classes that talks about the MySQL server, you already know how to run those commands. Okay. Are there any questions?
What class would one take to learn that? In school.
Okay, if you want to learn how to use MySQL and also how to use the web interface, because that's basically what we want to do here, let me show you the catalog. Okay, so what you want to do is to take a web class. Okay, it's under CISW, and the class that you want to take is, I don't like it because they don't really arrange things the right way. Okay, so they have this particular degree. It's a database management degree, and if you look at the courses listed, many of those are related to what we kind of need for this purpose. cisp362 is one of the classes. It's called database programming, so it will talk about MySQL, not MySQL but SQL in general. If you want to learn how to do web scripting, it's a CISW, I think it's 420. There we go. So CISW 410 or 420 would be classes that would be very useful for what we are talking about here. Okay, are there any questions at this point?
We didn't want to put in that root command you put in there.
Huh?
Because you didn't have a database yet.
Yeah, well, if you're not going to use a database, don't worry a single thing about it. This is all about using a database. Okay. Now, if I go to a particular account, so let me do my superpower thing and then go to a particular account. Okay. So I'm going to okay. So now I'm pretending to be a student and going to that student's own account here. When you go to your own account after you sign in, you do an ls, it will show you the files that are currently in your home folder. Okay? And you can see the files called do not delete files, do not put web files here, because too many people did that. This is the wrong place to put the web files. So do not put your files in the root directory of your home folder, because that's not exposed to the web server. Okay? So what you want to do is to go to the public HTML folder, and we'll do another ls here. And once again, you see the same two files. You're saying do not delete files here, do not put web files over here. That's because when you put files over here, you can potentially overwrite the index file, and that just kind of mess up other classes. So don't put any files over here. Instead, you want to go to cisp362, and now you can do whatever you want over here. Okay. This is not a class where I would grade your HTML documents, so I'm not going to go to the Power Server and click on your web pages and see how they look. So you can play around with index.html itself, which is just a very simple HTML file at this point. You can create your CSV files. You can create your scripts that can generate CSV format, output. Do whatever you want here. Okay. The system is already set up to deal with Perl, PHP. I do not think Python is set up. Okay. But out of those two languages, PHP and also Perl, it is already sufficient to do most of the things that you need to do. We already have libraries installed as well, so PHP and Perl can both talk to MySQL, talk to the database. Okay, I'm not going to turn this into a web programming class, so I'm going to stop here. Just give you a pointer to the tools that you need in order to build up your app if you want to use a remote connection. Okay, you also have access to my files. If you I think so. I think I gave you the source code of the two scripts that I talked about last time in the previous class on Monday. So you can just easily replicate those files. And the one thing that you have to remember is to turn on the execute flag of the Perl files, the PL files. And for those of you who are going to do it, I will help you out during the lab time. So I'm not going to use up too much time here to talk about how to do web scripting on the server side. Okay. Any questions about this stuff here? At least why or who might be interested in doing this. Okay.
Curious, why do you like Perl over something like Python?
It's just a habit for me, because Python doesn't use curly braces, and I'm very used to curly braces. Perl also has a, I know the libraries supported by Perl already, and it's just, part of it is just laziness. I don't want to learn new things, relearn everything to do exactly the same thing in Python. I think the two languages are pretty much equivalent in terms of what problems they can solve and what kind of solution they can express. The differences mostly would be the syntax. Do you know of any other differences between those two, other than the superficial stuff?
I actually don't know any Perl.
Oh, you know Python, but not Perl.
I know a little bit of Python, more of a C.
Yeah, if you're a C and C++ programmer, Perl is actually going to be more natural because the syntax is borrowed from C and C++, whereas Python has its own indentation-based, nesting, syntax.
It's also like you can server-side JavaScript too.
That's not set up on the Power Server.
Yeah, you need like JS.
Yeah, no ASP or JSP on the Power Server. ASP is Microsoft's active server page, I think. Yep. So that's not supported either on the Power Server. Okay, but just given what is already given here, you can already do some live data testing. Now there's one thing that I wish I could do, but I cannot do it. Even though it looks like I can do it, I cannot. Okay, I'll show you what it looks like. You can do a HTTPS connection to the Power Server, and it goes to exactly the same places as the regular places. But the first thing you will see is a big, huge warning sign because I did not pay for a valid certificate. So this is a self-signed certificate, and most browsers would frown on it and say, "Are you sure you want to do this? This may be someone trying to steal your data, right?" But we are not going to do anything here that requires any type of signing on, so why would you be concerned, right? So with a regular browser, you can say, yes, I want to do this anyway, just go away, right? With App Inventor, you don't have that option. Okay. In other words, in the App Inventor, if you set up your URL to https://power.arc.lostreels.edu, whatever after that, it will say the connection failed. Okay, and it has to do with the certificate not validated. Yep.
probably bypass that by adding the the custom certificate authority to the Android device.
Yep, you can also do that. You can basically override the Android device itself and say, yes, this is a certificate authority when it's not. Yep. So we can look into that solution too if that is something you want to look into. But before we do that, just make sure you don't store any type of sensitive data on the power server, because even if we enable HTTPS correctly, if you store like social security numbers or credit card numbers, they are still exposed. They're still exposed to other accounts on Power, and there are a lot of people using Power Server at this point. So I still would not store anything that can potentially be sensitive on the Power Server. Just make up some fake data on the Power Server. So in that case, whether it's HTTPS or not HTTPS doesn't matter. Yeah, because in this class we just want some practice. We basically are working with toy applications. I don't want anyone to store actual data into the database. All right. Any questions about the Power Server or just what this is for? No questions about that? Okay, very good. So the next thing we're going to do is to go to App Inventor, because I read all the project proposals already and I graded all of those. So you should see your the score of your submission. There are several things that I want to go over. One has to do with use case diagrams. I think a few people do not get the use case diagrams correct. In other words, they're putting into the bubbles nouns instead of verbs, instead of actions. So that's one thing. And then the other thing has to do with, well, you have to make sure App Inventor can do what you propose to do. That is the most important part. One particular project, if I remember correctly, requires a tone generator. In other words, there will be tones to generate, for tuning something. Okay, if you look through, all the components in App Inventor, there's no tone generator. In other words, you cannot just arbitrarily say, I want to generate a tone at 440 hertz. Okay, I think that's middle C, right?
A440.
That's A. Okay, so the A, is that the A higher than the middle C, or the one below? That's low. That's below middle C, I think.
That's below middle C.
Yeah, the one immediately below middle C.
Well, actually, that's above middle C.
No, it's below. I think middle C is 500 something. So anyway, but you cannot specify a frequency and say, oh, Android app, generate, that sound at that frequency. It doesn't do that. So the only way to make a, tone application work is to pre-record the tones from a computer and then have it imported into your app. Okay, it's not as difficult as it seems, because the tone tend to be pretty small files, but you do have to pre-record the tones in order for an Android app using App Inventor to generate that tone, to be able to select that tone. Okay, are you guys understanding what I'm saying? Okay, so if you want to make a guitar, tuning application, then you have the typical chords, right? The typical strings that you want to tune, and you just have to pre-record a particular frequency, and then Android can pick it up, or App Inventor can pick up, at that point, because you can go to Media, go to Player, drag and drop a player into your application. Oh, I got one already. So I'm gonna delete the extra one. Okay, let me open up the blocks editor, and that way we can take a look at what you can do with the player. Does anyone know of a good tool to generate, tones? If you know the frequency, if it's just a sine wave, how do you generate a tone so you can just export it to a WAV file or whatever format that App Inventor can take? Come on, you guys know the app.
There's a lot of synthesizer apps you can get that.
You don't need a synthesizer, you just need a tone generator in this case. It's Audacity. Audacity can do it. Okay, so I'll get you to the website. Okay, so let's go to Audacity. Okay, if you just look up Audacity, the first link is to the website. It's a free audio editor and recorder. It's really quite useful, for many different types of purposes. I'll show you what it looks like, once it's installed. It's not installed on the machine that you're using, so you probably cannot get to it right there. But this is what you can do. I can generate tones, and then I can say oh, it can even generate square waves. But let's say it's a sine wave, 440 frequency, and then the amplitude is from is at 0.8, which is not peaking out. Okay, it's just short of peaking out, saturating the output. And then we specify the duration. This is a 30-second duration. I'll just go ahead and say yes. Okay. So now we have a 30-second tone at 440 hertz. Okay. Not sure whether the audio is hooked up. It's supposed to be doing it. So I have to turn on these things and hope that it works. That's 440. Is that an A? Because we have some guitar players in this room, and they can actually tell. I'm tone deaf.
Sounds like an A.
Okay. I'm tone deaf, which means if you give me two tones, I can tell you they are a third apart. I can tell you the difference between the tones, but I cannot tell absolute tones or absolute notes. Some people can, and I cannot. I can only do the relative. So once you have a tone ready, what you can do is you can just export it. So you can say, okay, so it sounds the same, right? Okay, so then you can export it, and what you can do is to export it using one of the formats that is accepted by App Inventor, like a WAV file. And WAV file is going to be quite big, so you might want to choose some other types of files, like an MP3 file. And you specify a location to save it. I'll go to the /temp folder, and then we save it as 440 hertz .mp3. And now it's saving the file. Actually, it's going to ask me something first before it saves the file. There we go. So Audacity understands the MP3 format, because in the MP3 format you can also enter all of these different tags. I'm not going to enter anything here because it's just a tone. So I'm just going to say OK, and it is saved in the temp folder. Once you have the tone saved in the temp folder, you can go back to App Inventor, the resources editor part of it. Okay, you can go back to App Inventor. And then what you can do is to go to the media part of components, and then you click upload new, choose file, you go back to the location where the tone was located, 440 hertz.mp3, click open, click OK to upload it. And once it's uploaded, we have the media resource here inside App Inventor. And then when you go to the blocks editor, here, you go to My Blocks, you go to Player 1, and now you can specify, okay, let me put a button first, so we can trigger the operation. So let's switch back to this portion here, drag and drop a button, so we can trigger the operation. Go back to Blocks Editor. In button 1, we can specify when it's clicked, I want to play that tone. Okay, so we go to Player 1. Okay, let's take a look at the blocks associated with Player 1. Player 1 is just a media player. It has all of these things that it can do. The first thing you want to do is to be able to specify what am I playing. So that has to do with the source. So you have to say set Player 1 source to something. Okay, and in this case the something is going to be the file name, okay, the name of the file. Okay, if you go to Player 1, so the source is just the file name, and then you have to go to built-in here, go to text, so they can specify the file name itself, and it is 440 hertz.mp3. And then after that, we can go back to My Blocks, and then go to player one, and basically call player one start. So this will start the playing of the tone, but this block will complete instantly. Okay. In other words, it will start the tone or the media playing, and then it will complete immediately. So if you have something else to do, after the tone is finished, then you have to rely on the event handler called player one completed. Okay. So if you don't have any specific things to do after the tone is finished, you don't have to do anything. You just trigger the starting point of the tone. If you have something else to do, after the tone is finished, then you have to use this block here to basically say, once the tone is finished, go ahead and do all the other things. Okay. One thing you might want to do is during the playing of the tone, disable the button, so people cannot just keep hitting that button and have the tone to basically interrupt itself, its own playing. Any questions at this point? No questions? Okay, if there are no questions, I'm gonna try this out, because the first thing we want to do is to double check and verify that this actually works, right? So now we have, I'm gonna use my own phone for this purpose.
You got to work?
You
got it to work?
I think so.
Last time you tried to do it and it didn't recognize it.
It didn't recognize.
It saw it, but it didn't allow you to do anything with it.
Okay. Oh, you mean this part here? It didn't actually see my phone? Well, we can test certain things. We can definitely go to player one and go to the completed portion and have it do something over here. We can just say that, go to button one, set button one, enabled to true. And then we'll disable the button when the tone is still playing. So go to My Blocks, button one, set button one enabled to false. Okay, so this will this will definitely confirm one way or another, even though I cannot play the tone itself. All right. Because I think there are at least 2 projects in this class that involves playing either a tone or a sound file. So I think this part will definitely be useful for some of the projects. I was able to program my phone, through App Inventor when I was home, but I couldn't do it here. So that's some configuration differences. There we go. All right. So click the button. Yep, it works. But at least in the emulator. All right. Are there any questions about this whole process? No questions? Okay, so I think your proposal and your proposal both involved being able to play some sound. So this is how you can play a generated sound. This is a sine wave generated by Audacity. If you want to play a guitar recording, then you will have to use a tool to record an actual recording, turn it into an MP3 file, upload it to your app, and then you can play it.
I'm not actually making a straight out tuner, but what software compares the tone you give it to the reference tone to let you know if you're in tune?
Nothing on an Android device that I know of can do this kind of processing. Yep, go ahead.
You have to have like a spectrum analyzer.
Yeah, Audacity can do that, but it's not something you can run on an Android.
Yeah.
So let me show you what I mean by that. Okay, so we'll go to Audacity right here. So you can actually select, a portion of your tone here. In fact, I can, just, oh, okay, that's not what I want to do. Undo, edit.
We have to do like some cloud processing in order to do that.
Yeah, but it's built into this tool. So in this tool here, you can basically select, a small portion of, whatever waveform you have recorded, and then you go to View. If I remember correctly, I haven't used it for a long time. Nope, it's not under View. It's Analyze, Plot Spectrum. So now we can actually see the peak of this spectrum here. And this one peaks at about, you can see from the scale, it's about 440. So if you compare two, you can basically plot the spectrum, of one, and then plot the spectrum of the other one, and see if they peak at the same frequency. So that's how you can compare the tones, visually. But as far as using a software tool to do it, I do not know of any, special component inside Android that can do that.
Yeah.
Or app
I
Inventor, I
have
should say.
a bunch of tuning programs. Like some of them, you just hold them up and to a song, and it'll tell you what chords you're playing.
Yeah.
Can I just like open their files and look in there?
It's probably difficult to do it in App Inventor because the logic to actually do the analysis is in the app itself. Does it require network connection, or
I don't
does
think it does. The tuners don't know. So I could probably just open that file and look and see how they did it. As
It's
I
probably
actually-
not going to be easy because what you're talking about, figuring out all the tones, in a chord, is basically the same thing, except there are multiple peaks. So the first thing you have to do is to do what we call a fast Fourier transform, so that we convert from the time domain into the frequency domain, and then you have to pick out the peaks in the frequency domain and say, okay, these are the notes, in this particular chord. And that's not something that is easily done because you have to get through all the math, all the calculations to do the fast Fourier transform. So I would say that's probably a little bit beyond, way beyond the scope of this particular class. The best you can do is to store the reference as well as the tone, and then just pretend that you can have another person to replay both of them.
Right, we talked about
And
that.
then evaluate and say, okay, your tone is off. You might want to tune it to a higher pitch or lower pitch. So you can still do it. Just assume that a person instead is going to do the evaluation instead of having a program to do it. So just worry about the interface of your app and not really about how it's done.
Getting the whistle totally blow all the ways and
Yeah.
totally necessary right now.
Okay. All right. But this is one way you can do it on the PC, but you can't do it on using App Inventor. Okay. Even if App Inventor can do it, like even though Java can specify code to do it, the code itself is complicated enough that even the next class cannot do it. We can't talk about how to do fast Fourier transform in Java in the next class. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Now, when I give you feedback, for your project, unless I see everything is okay, sometimes I will give you suggestions like, okay, this seems kind of ambitious. Make sure you know how to blah blah blah. Do a certain thing. So if you see that as my feedback, you definitely want to check with me and make sure that you can get that part done, because there are certain things that some people want to do that can be a little bit challenging, depending on the programming background. Okay. Any questions at this point? No questions? How many people are still thinking about, I want to be able to hook up to a remote database? Even if it is very simple, I still want to be able to kind of reach out. Okay, so we got a few people to do that. Okay, so I'll definitely spend some more time, on that and give you some additional information. But what is already included on the website is already good enough for a mock-up. Okay, it's not accessing an actual database, but it's giving you the format of the output of a database, so you can actually use that as a basis to basically start to write your programs. All right. Any other questions before we move on to other stuff? No questions? All right. If there are no questions, we'll take a look at some of the other components, particularly how to switch screens. Okay, because switching screens is something that is not quote unquote not supported by the App Inventor interface, but it can be done. It's just that you cannot use App Inventor to do it. Okay, so let's go ahead and switch back to the resources editor here. Okay, so for some of you, I think what you're proposing will require multiple screens. If you need multiple screens, you cannot just live with the first screen. And by the way, the name of the first screen, screen 1, cannot be changed. Okay, so the name cannot be changed, even though the caption can be changed. So what I mean by that is this name here cannot be changed. When screen 1 is the component selected, you look down here, rename as a button is grayed out. So screen 1 as a name cannot be changed. On the other hand, the title of screen 1 can be changed. So you should change that to the name of your app. Okay? So this way, your app doesn't look kind of half finished because it just says screen 1 when the root screen is displayed. You can add additional screens to your app just by clicking add screen. Okay, so you can add screen and it will ask you what is the name of the screen that you're adding. So you can basically say, configuration. Okay, let's say it's configuration in this case. You click OK, and you can see that over here now we have two screens. We have screen 1, and then we have configuration as the second screen. This is all nice, okay? Except there's a problem with debugging apps like this. App Inventor, or the AI companion, the App Inventor companion, cannot debug programs with two screens or more than one screen. So when we go back to the blocks editor and go back to the app here, it shows the second screen, even though I'm not using the second screen. Okay. Let's go find out how to change the screen. Changing the screen is actually pretty easy. Basically, whatever screen I select here in the viewer is whatever screen your app is going to display. So the debugger automatically switches the screen to be in sync with it. So you can see that when I'm selecting screen 1 in the resources editor, screen 1 is displayed on the other side, connected by App Inventor companion. If I switch to the configuration screen, it will change on the other side as well. Okay. So inside the app itself, how do you change the screen, actively? That's the question. So let's switch back to screen 1 first, because when an app starts, it's always starting with screen 1. So whatever you want to do, to switch to screens, you have to start with screen 1. We switch to the blocks editor. And this time I know I have to go to my blocks, go take a look at screen 1. And it's one of the actions of screen 1 that you have to trigger in order to switch a screen. So we'll take a look here. It can only be things with a notch on the top, a notch on the top and a tab at the bottom. So screen 1.
How about to go to the website?
Go to website.
And find another
think I might have documented it too, so I'll just cheat and look at my own notes.
You need something else, I think. You need something else, not screen.
I have it done already. In fact, I got it in the notes already. So if we just, I'm just gonna cheat and read my own notes. And that's why I wrote notes, so that I don't forget stuff. All right, so it's about basic user interface, and I think it's under properties of screen. Here. I haven't figured out once. I just have to remember how I did it. Let's take a look again. I think it has to do with the other screen. So we have to look at the other screen and then, yep, pretty sure about that. Let's take a look. Okay, this is the other screen. Okay, the other thing that you have to remember is when you look at the other screen configuration in this case, once this screen is selected, you go back to the blocks editor, it's now empty. That's because the two screens cannot share anything. Okay, when I say it cannot share anything, I mean anything. So all your variables, all the buttons, all the text boxes, labels, and whatnot, they cannot be shared. Okay, they're basically independent of each other. So that's one problem that we have, and how do we solve that problem? If you copy and paste, you're basically creating new buttons, and they are not linked with the buttons on the other screen. So if you want to pass information like data from one screen to another screen, you cannot do that easily using just a duplication of buttons. There are two ways to do it. I just need to find the right blocks to do it. I cannot remember how I did it the first time. Yep.
I don't have it loaded, so can you actually copy and paste blocks between screens?
No.
I do not know, but
Yeah.
even if you could, it's not the same thing as they do not share anything, even
Yeah.
if you can do it that
But
way.
like you have a special procedure that is independent,
They're independent. They're completely independent
but,
objects.
so you don't have to manually recreate it.
I don't think there's a way to do it. We can give it a try. Go to screen 1 and select 1 and see whether we have an option to. Nope, there's no option to copy and paste anyway, so it cannot be done. You can try to drag it into configuration. It doesn't work.
No, I mean the
Blocks.
code block, the blocks area. Like if you first copy a chunk of code, switch screens, and see if you can paste it.
It's not going to work.
You can't do it between screens. It'll give you an error, tell you that it'll be available in a future release.
Okay, but what do you do to switch screen? Which block do you use to switch screen? That's what that is what I cannot remember.
You need to.
Is it open or is it screen open animation?
No. You need to use another component.
Sorry?
It's you go to.
Yeah, try my blocks.
No, not here.
Screen 1.
These are all screen 1. I need a way to open another screen. Yep, go ahead.
Can I show you?
Sure. I got to figure out once. The biggest problem is not to switch the screen.
Can you go to the website?
Go to the website. Sure. There you go. The biggest problem is, when you get to the other screen and you do all kinds of configuration, you have to return all that data back to the first screen or back to the app in some way. The best way to do it is to use TinyDB, because TinyDB is the same regardless of which screen you're on, and it's also persistent. In other words, if you close your app, or for whatever reason your Android system crashes, whatever you store in TinyDB stays there. It is persistent.
look at this properties accelerometer. So, yeah, block editors. Can you move to block blocks editor?
Blocks editor. Yep. There we go.
And use accelerometers.
I don't think it has any way to switch screen using accelerator. Maybe under my definition, there's nothing under that. Okay. I think I'm gonna cheat
Can you-
some more. Oh, go ahead. Okay, go ahead. I wrote an app once, to switch screens, so I know how to do it. I just cannot remember how I did it the first time. Okay, let me just do a quick search. Orientation sensor. Okay, so we'll just look for App Inventor, switch screens.
Something and it's called open another screen. I don't remember where I found it though.
Is it, which drawer is it under?
I don't know. I have it here on my screen. I don't remember where I found it though. It's called open another screen.
From button one thing.
Yeah. Listen on
There we go. It's under control. Doing.
Under where?
It's under control. If you go to built-in, go to the control drawer. It's down here. Call, open another screen. That's it.
Kind of hard to figure out.
I remember, that it can be done. I just could not remember how I did it. So I'm gonna put this one into button1.click, and then now you have to specify the screen name. In this case, it's configuration. It's really just the name of the screen itself, not the caption, not the title, but the actual name. So in this case, it's my configuration screen, and that's it. So when I click button one in an app, it should switch the screen. The problem is the companion software doesn't let it happen because it says it's not supported, but only during development, which means if you pack your app into an APK file and then you upload the APK file and you install it on the target platform, it would actually run. So it's one more step to do it. Okay, if you already have your phone or Android device connected, what you do is you go back to the resources editor, and then you just have to use, right here, package for phone, and then you select, download to connected phone, and that will not only pack the APK file, it will upload the APK file to the phone and have it installed and run it at the same time. Well, I don't think it runs it. You have to click open to run the app. But this is how you debug an app with multiple screens. You cannot rely on the companion itself to handle it. You have to package the phone, the app, and then run it on the phone itself. Okay. Let me see if it works, because the emulator should work with this as well. So we'll go ahead and give it a try. Maybe at some point we'll have power to run the App Inventor software, on that server. So then we can make all kinds of customizations to it. Yep.
What's that called when you have your own App Inventor
I think it's just an App Inventor server.
So you can
So
just download and install it, and you can actually make more modifications open source.
Because it is open source.
Gotcha.
So the source code has to be available, and you have the permission to change the source code as well, and then redistribute it. That's basically the whole idea of open source. Okay, so we'll take a look at the
That works.
application successfully downloaded. All right. And the question is it installed? Yep.
I have to go back home screen.
Yeah, hit the back button, back. There we go. And I call this app demo hello Perl, so that one is installed. I don't see the new app that I just uploaded. Speech recorder, sound, there we go. So we click it, now we click the button and it switches the screen. So it does work, even with the emulator. Did you guys see what I just did?
Mm-hmm.
More or less. Okay, I'll do it again. Okay, let's do it again. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. So I'll close the emulator and close the blocks editor as well. And just show you guys what it looks like at this point. We have two screens. Screen 1 is the name of the first screen that cannot be changed. The second screen I just call it configuration. Probably better to call it configuration screen or config screen, just so that it has the word screen in the name itself. Now I open up the blocks editor so we can look at the blocks and also get a connection to the virtual machine. Okay. Go ahead and get that started. All right, so now that we have the blocks editor started, you have an option. If you can connect to your mobile device, then you just go ahead and do the connection through connect to device. For those of you who don't have a device to connect to, you can always just use an emulator. And I just click new emulator to start a new emulator up and running. I'm switching back to this screen here just to make sure that I did not lose anything in screen 1. Go back to the components editor. Everything is still here, so that's all good. Go to the, okay, so now the emulator has started. So now the question is, how do I debug an application that has multiple screens? If you just go to connect to device, emulator, like that, it can upload the application and even run it. But it won't be able to actually run the portion of multiple screen. You can only work with the first screen. The moment you try to switch to the second screen, it's not going to work. So we'll just take a look at how it's going to fail. Okay. All right, so now we are inside the companion, App Inventor companion on the mobile device itself, running the application. As soon as I try to switch to the second screen by clicking the button, it complains and says switching forms or screens is not currently supported in development. But you can actually do it if you send the app and install the app itself directly. To do that, you want to disable or get out of the companion software or the version that's running inside the companion and use the back button to do that. So now you're back to here. And then you switch back to the resources editor, inside the browser, and then you click package for phone and select download to connected phone, because right now App Inventor is still connected to the emulator, so the connection between those two is still established. It's just that it's not running the companion software on the other side anymore. So we'll go through the process to compile, all the code, prepare the icon, prepare all the resources and whatnot, and then eventually it will upload and install the app remotely. So we'll just have to wait a little bit here because it depends on how many people are doing this at the same time. Okay, so the APK file will be installed in the phone. So I switch back to the emulator, and if you click this button here, you can see all the apps installed, and you scroll up depending on the name of your application. And at some point, this app, should appear. It is called Sound.
You'll get a dialog box that says it's been installed.
Yep. And it will also reflect here as well. So right there, as soon as you see this dialog box that says, application successfully downloaded to phone, it is also downloaded and installed on phone. So now if I switch back to the emulator, you can see, this app here is called Sound. And if you click it once, it will start the application. And now we can switch screens. Okay. So are there any questions about the process of switching screens or starting an application that switches screens?
How do you switch back?
How do you switch back? Good question. Okay, to switch back, you just click the back button and it automatically switches back. Okay, so if you're just talking about how do you switch back and forth, it's pretty easy. To go forward, you click a button or do something that would trigger the screen switch. If you want to go back, you just click the back button on an Android device and it will go back.
So how does Inventor support like gestures, like you can swipe like left side or right side up?
No, it does not. In fact, you cannot do gesture when you have a single pointer on your screen. So the emulator for sure does not support it. The swipe action, is not reported to the App Inventor app itself. So you cannot interpret that event unless you're on a canvas. So if you're on a canvas, you can interpret swipes and other types of actions, but even so, it's not multi-touch. Okay. Because if you have multiple screens and you do a swipe, which screen are you switching to? You still have to use your own logic to determine, okay, you want to switch to the next screen, but then which one is your next screen? You need your own logic to designate which one is your next screen. So for this class, we're still going to rely on buttons to switch screens or some other thing to trigger it, because the swiping action or the scroll action is not supported. We cannot detect that action from the user. Okay. All right. Well, this is all good. The app is specified here. But the problem is I cannot share any type of data between the two screens. Okay, I can enter data on one, but that data cannot be, it cannot be transported onto the other side. Okay, so let's take a look at what I mean by that. Okay, let's go back to the resources editor, and I'm gonna dismiss this, switch back to the first screen here. So let's say in the first screen I have a very simple thing for entering data. I have a text box to do it. So we'll go to a text box, and we can just type whatever we want in the text box here. And I want the second screen to also have a text box to reflect that. Okay. All right. In fact, I changed my mind. In the first screen, I will have a label. In the second screen, I have a text box, and I want those two to be connected, because remember, the second screen is called configuration. So I want the configuration screen to let people enter something, and then when they click the back button, I will go back to the first screen, and the first screen should pick up the change and reflect that in the label. Okay. So on the first screen, I have a label, and the label can start with the initial text of text for label 1. It doesn't matter. Okay. And then in the second screen, I want this text box to get the content from that label. Are we doing okay so far, with what I want to do? Okay. So if I go back to the blocks editor, okay, let's go back to screen 1 first, and then go to the blocks editor. We can take a look at the label at label 1 here, there's nothing here that says, oh, link the value of label 1 to text box 1 in the second screen. Because anything in the second screen is not visible from this side at all. It's just not visible. Okay? Are we doing okay so far with that concept? So how do we get something, get some data points or some information from the initial screen to the second screen? That's the first question. Okay? Okay, we look at this call here, we look at this block here, call open another screen. Do you see any options here whatsoever that will allow you to specify, oh, by the way, I want to pass along what we call parameters like this, that, and whatnot? No, nothing, right? So the only way to do it is to use a TinyDB. Okay, so I'll show you guys how to use a TinyDB so you can get something across multiple screens. So the first thing we have to do is to add a TinyDB to the application. Let me just get rid of certain things that I don't really need at this point. Okay. And then you specify TinyDB from basic. You drag it into the viewer pane, and it will appear here as a non-visible component, which is right, because it's just an invisible thing in the background. The one thing about TinyDB that you have to understand is, by itself, it has no properties. Okay, it is only representing a portal to a persistent storage on your phone, so that you can store stuff in it. And TinyDB is specific to the app, not to a screen. So you can have 20,000 screens, for a particular app. They all connect to the same TinyDB. And we're gonna use that because now I can share data. Okay, so the next thing I'm gonna do is I will switch back to my blocks editor. Before I make a switch to another screen, I'm gonna export the data from the label into the TinyDB. So I go to TinyDB1, and there are only 3 things you can do with a TinyDB1. Technically only 2, because the last one is really only useful when you use the advanced tab. So the only 2 things you can do is, 1, you can get a value based on the tag. You can store a value based on the tag. That's it. Okay, those are the only 2 things you can do with a TinyDB, which is more than sufficient for my purposes. Okay, because what I want to do is I'm going to store a value right before I switch the screen. Now I have 2 things to do. I have to fill in these 2 little notches here. The first one is the name of the tag. Okay, it's just text. So you go to built-in, you go to text, and you specify the name of that tag here. Okay, so I'll just say, let's say this is username. Okay, that particular label represents the username. And then the value to store is going to be coming from what? The label itself. The text of the label is going to be the value to store, because I want the label to be linked to the text box of the next screen. So I go back to my blocks here, go to label 1, and then we refer to label1.text and attach it here. Are we doing okay so far? Okay, so right before I do the switch to the next screen, I store stuff into the TinyDB as a way to communicate with the next screen. Are we doing okay so far? Okay. So now inside the resources editor, I'm going to switch to the next screen. It's kind of cumbersome because you can't switch screen inside the blocks editor. You can only switch it inside the resources editor. But that's okay, it's no big deal. We can switch back and forth a little bit here. So this is in the second screen, the configuration screen. We only have a text box here, which is not sufficient because we also need its own TinyDB. So we go back to the resources editor here and then drag and drop TinyDB1 into screen 2, into the configuration screen, because TinyDB1 is a component of a particular screen. So that means even though screen 1 has a TinyDB1 component, the second screen, the configuration screen, doesn't inherit that, doesn't share the same TinyDB1 object with the first screen. It needs its own TinyDB1 component. So now that we have a TinyDB1 component in the second screen, we can switch back to the blocks editor and go to TinyDB1. Okay, the first thing we have to do is to say, So when am I going to update the text box? What do you think?
Change for another screen.
When the screen first opens, right? When it's switched to this particular screen. So now we go to My Blocks and we look at configuration, which is the screen itself. When configuration.back is pressed, okay, we don't. It's not time to deal with this one yet. When it's initialized, maybe we should do this, okay? When configuration other screen closed, not yet. We are not going to deal with that. So this is what we want: is when this particular screen is first initialized, okay? The back button would actually close it, so the next time we press the button, it actually would trigger it to be reinitialized. Yep.
When you open up the second screen, is the first one actually closed? Or
No,
is it
it
just
does
a-
not. It's
just two memories?
you can kind of think of it as sitting in the background. So your second screen is now laid on top of the first one. So the first one is inaccessible. It's really, but it's still happening in the background. So it's not closed. Okay. Okay. So we are going to capture the initialized event here, and the first thing we want to do is to grab the content from TinyDB and stash it into textbox1. So we go to textbox1 here and say set textbox1.text to something. Okay, so we put it here. Oops. Nope, wrong one. That's the value of textbox1.text. We want to set it so it's an action. And what we want to set it to is based on TinyDB1. Is this time we are getting a value. You have to be careful this time because whatever text you specify as the tag of this TinyDB1 get operation, it has to be exactly the same as the name that we used before, which is username in this case. Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and test it. We have enough stuff, already modified that we can actually test it. But remember, we can't really test it using, the companion software. We actually have to re-upload the application. So let me close the companion interface here first. Oh, this is actually running from the application. And then we'll go back to the resources editor, go to package for phone, and click download to connected phone again. And it's going to go through the same thing, and when we get the dialog box that says it's already downloaded, then we can switch back to the emulator and test the program again. I can also show the emulator just in case it prompts me and say, do you want to update this application? Because on my actual device, that's what it would actually ask me, do I want to update the application? So things is uploaded. It doesn't give me any messages, so it's already uploaded. So I start my new application, the updated application. This one is updated because it has got text for label 1, and that's my username. Okay, so I click the button now, switch to the second screen, and you can see text for label 1 is now here. So I have just moved, or copied the data point from the first screen, the initial screen, to the configuration screen. Now here comes the second step, okay? Because I can do all the changes that I want, on this side here and say, okay, so the username is, let's say, tag Aoyang here, press the enter key. All right, I'm done with this screen, okay? When I press the back key here, it goes back to the first screen, but nothing is changed on that label. It is still the same as text for label 1. So now I have the second issue, right? The second issue is, I can do all the updates in the second screen, but how do I get all the information back to the first screen? As it turns out, there are two ways to do that. The first way, which I think is a better way, is to use the same mechanism, okay? So I go to My Blocks here in the second screen, go to the configuration screen, and basically I say, whenever the back key is pressed, do the following. Okay. And what do you think I should do in this case?
Same.
Yep,
TinyDB.
update the TinyDB so it's updated. Okay, so here I would go to TinyDB1, go to call TinyDB1.store value, and I'm gonna duplicate this block here, or I can just create a new one. The tag is still the same as username. The value to store in this case is going to be the text property of textbox1. So I go to my blocks, go to textbox1, and then I go to textbox1.text and put it here. Okay. Any questions about this step? All right. So it sounds like it's all done, right? So we go back to the resources editor, and then we package for phone again. Switch to the emulator because we're gonna get out of the old version first, so I don't accidentally run the old version when the new version is ready. And it's not letting me get out.
Just go back to the home screen.
Hmm?
Go back to the home screen. Lower left.
It's kind of locked up. Well, I guess it's just slow. It's not locked up, it's just slow. All right, so we'll give it a moment. But you guys, some of you probably know that the app is not done yet. Okay, even though I store it back into the TinyDB, Screen 1 doesn't know it. Screen 1 doesn't know that anything has changed in the TinyDB. So the label is not going to get updated because nobody says, oh, you know what, this value in the TinyDB is now updated. Go ahead and update the label. But I wanted, just show you guys, so we can actually see the problem itself.
What's TinyDB's limitations?
You mean in terms of capacity?
Yeah.
It probably is just the capacity of your internal storage on your phone, on your device.
No, so it's only about 10 gigabytes.
However, it may not be the most efficient way to do it. In other words, as you start to store more and more stuff, the delay to get something and to store something may increase rapidly. Yep.
Is TinyDB a flat file?
I think it's a flat file. It could be a hash, but even so, it's still going to be slow to access. It's not designed for efficiency. It's not designed to store a lot of stuff. It's designed more like a registry to store configuration data, but not really a lot of user data. Because it doesn't have the concept of a table or anything like that. So it's not going to be suitable to replace a table in the database. All right, so we got the application uploaded. Go back to here, start the app again. Click this, change this. Okay, and then click the back button. It's not going back. I think it has to do with when I click the back button, it's triggering the operation here. And it's not closing it. I'm intercepting the back button being pressed, but I'm just saying, oh, just store the value, but I'm not closing the screen itself. So I have to actually do it myself here, go to the screen, and then call make the screen close in this case.
Ted,
Yep.
can you just do it on this screen one to initialize? Because every time you open a new screen, you come back to the screen, that screen reinitializes.
It should be reinitialized.
Yeah, so you could just do it by in screen one, just screen one dot initialize and then change label one text from the TinyDB.
No. When you go back to screen 1, it's not reinitialized. It should not trigger initialize.
It does on that.
It does?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll show you.
Okay, so you can do it that way too. under close screen. Oh, close screen. Thank you. Or you can close screen with value. Okay, so that's the other way to pass information back, is to say close screen with value. Okay, so let's do that here. Close screen with value. And this time we'll close screen, wrong place to stash it, right over here. So this time we'll stash it with, we'll also close screen with value and specify the result of text screen, textbox1.text. So we go to my blocks, textbox1, and we'll get the text property here. Okay. And go back to the other screen. I'm just going to finish the app here, so I'm not gonna wait for another round. So in the first screen, we go back to the blocks editor, and then we can go to my blocks under screen 1. This time we have this little method here, or this little trigger here, that says when screen 1.other screen closed. Now this time it is handy, because it basically says when we transition back to screen 1 because another screen closed, this event will be triggered. So we can capture the event of the other screen actually closing. And in this case, what we can do is to say we'll just get the result here, and we'll put the result into the label. So we go to label 1, we go to set label 1 text 2, and then we go to my blocks under my definitions. Here we have result, and we'll just set it like that. Okay. Are we doing okay so far? In other words, if screen 1 starts another screen, okay, in this case configuration, and configuration closes for whatever reason, okay, it can be the back button, can be another button, can be by itself, a timed action. If configuration closes, this event gets triggered. Screen 1.other screen closed gets triggered, and as a result of this, we can actually get the result from the other screen. In this case, the result is a single value, which is the updated username. Okay. And then we can associate an action with this particular trigger, so that the text, the label in screen 1 will be updated accordingly. Then we switch back to here and just do one more update. How many people are using the Wi-Fi connection at home? And how about USB? Which one is better?
I find the USB is a little bit faster.
Yeah.
But not by a whole lot, I think.
I can't get mine to work. USB.
The USB?
Yeah, the Wi-Fi will work.
The Wi-Fi works because it has nothing to do with the driver.
Yeah.
The USB may or may not work depending on whether you have the right driver installed, because ADB requires its own driver.
You have to have USB debugging on to have it work.
Yep, you also have to have USB debugging to get ADB to work. The Wi-Fi works better because it's just wireless, right? I mean, you don't need the two things to be tethered.
Is having the USB debugging ADB running triggers normally? If you ever like want to go around your phone like it's like years of charge?
It depends on whether your computer itself is secure.
But if you're using like schools or like even just events,
You can get special cables where they only have the power but not the data communication. So then you can just use it for charging, but there's no danger. That's because there's actually no communication between the PC and the device. I have one cable like that. I did not know that it's a cable like that, so I was trying to use it for syncing, and it doesn't do any communication. Then I later on read the label. It's like, Oh, okay. It doesn't have the data connections. So, all right. So switching back to this, we'll start this one. It's gonna work this time. So we click the button to trigger to the second screen. We do some editing here, and then we press the back button here, and now the label is changed. Okay, here's my challenge to you guys. We're running out of time today. So my challenge is, what if I have multiple items from configuration that has to be passed back to the first screen? Okay, there are two solutions. The easy solution is TinyDB. Okay, because TinyDB has no limitations as to how many things you can specify in it. But if I want to use the other method, using the result of closing the screen,
Comma separated.
yep. But how do you do the comma separated thing? That's a challenge. Okay.
Create a list.
You can use a list. You can use a list in conjunction with a list. What you can also do is you can go to the text block here, and there is a function to do just that. It's the reverse of a split. I think it's called merge in most programming languages. Join can do it. It's just kind of cumbersome to do it. Split, split, split. Nope, it doesn't have a particular way to do it. Let me look on the list. Maybe it's on the list here. Make a list. Add item. Pack random item. There we go. List to CSV row. It doesn't get any easier. Just give it a list. Gives you a CSV row. You're all done. All right. So that's the end of today's lecture. Oh wait. Don't leave yet because we have the row sheet. Okay, I'm gonna put a row sheet next to the table back there. So before you get out, just do additional one for the row sheet. And today is the 18th. Okay, I forgot to cast the row sheet on the 16th, so we're not gonna take row on that day.
You're gonna have to write a script for every time you log in